This podcast is sponsored in part by REA, the Retired Employees Association of the City of San Diego. Their mission is to continue service to the community of San Diego. REA sponsors work important to the region, such as Voice of San Diego's Morning Report, food drives with the San Diego Food Bank, and financial support of programs like Learn to Swim through the Prevent Drowning Foundation and the COVID Relief Fund of the San Diego Foundation. Learn more at csdrea.org. Voice of San Diego podcasts are sponsored by the Bob Nelson Charitable Fund, honoring the Environmental Health Coalition, working to ensure environmental justice for all communities.
So here's the thing. I believe that one of the most important things that news organizations and our news organization can do in the city is help people understand how it works. It took me I'm still learning. I've been doing this work every hour of every working day into understanding how this community works, how the bonds for different schools work, how wastewater systems work, how land use works, schools, all of these things. You have to understand them if you want to make a difference, if you want to make San Diego better, and yet there's no simple way to understand them. We've been building that slowly but surely with every story we do and with every video we do. We try to help people understand their community. The Parker Foundation is right now offering us a match for what you give now to continue this particular type of work. So I need you to donate if you're willing to help us do that. If you've never given before, this is a great chance to try it out. You'll double your impact and support our mission to explain how all of this works in San Diego. We appreciate our donors. You mean a lot to us. And this is a chance to really help us do some special work. You can join now at vosd.org/ParkerMatch. Again, that's vosd.org/ParkerMatch. Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Scott Lewis, the CEO and editor-in-chief at Voice of San Diego, joined, as always, by Andrew Keats, assistant editor. Hello, Andy.
Scott, how you doing, pal?
Pretty well, thank you. Sarah Libby, managing editor. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
Coming up on the show this week, educators are scrambling to decide when and how to reopen the schools. Also, what does open really mean anyway? We'll talk about what we learned this week and what it could mean for schools, students, families, and educators. A new Voice of San Diego story this week explored Mayor Todd Gloria's approach to homeless camps strewn around the city. We have details on how homeless residents are being treated, what Gloria is doing, and where he's falling short. And a money bonanza is coming. We'll talk about the windfall of cash coming to schools, the state, and local governments, and what a balanced budget could mean for city politics. It's all coming up. Stay with us. Well, can't let this moment pass. Today, we are recording on Tom Hanks Day. This is the day 1 year ago when we were recording the podcast in the office with two guests that were supposed to be in front of a crowd of people at UC San Diego, and we made the radical decision to, instead of recording in front of hundreds of people in an indoor facility
with
on UC
buffet
San Diego's
style
campus,
food,
with buffet style food, remember the adorable hand-wringing conversations we were having about whether to cancel that event or not?
Yeah, and I feel like we all felt really like a little smug. Like we're gonna go ahead and cancel it because
we're doing the right thing. We're doing the right thing.
We're gonna do the right thing. You might not think it's the right thing. You might think we're being overly cautious.
But if you look at the Voice of San Diego announcement that event was canceled, it's so sheepish. It's so it's so embarrassed to be doing it. Like obviously nothing will come of this, and we'll look back and think about how silly it was that we canceled this event.
Best to be safe.
But it's best to be
conservative. So instead, we decided to record in the podcast studio with two people, the least ventilated room on earth.
Right.
And a member of the city council and a political consultant. And we all turn our phones off, except I think Sarah. And we finish recording and we look at Sarah and her eyes are gigantic and she's got a series of news updates. One of them was that Tom Hanks had been confirmed positive with the virus.
One was that the NBA season was canceled.
Yes.
The NBA season had been canceled. Not just like, hey, let's take a break for a minute. Just, we're off. We're done.
And the guy, President, can't remember his name, Trump, had he had announced a travel ban. All in the time that we shut ourselves into a hermetically sealed bubble.
No, there was one other. The WHO had declared it an actual pandemic.
Yeah,
it was quite a day in the life. And the next day we had a meeting to decide how we might handle things, and we've never been back as a group to the office since. It's what a ride. 1 year later. How has your 1 year been? Are you guys okay out there? You podcast listeners, you've been with us the whole time. We were able to keep going. Nate, John, shout out to him to get us back as a functioning podcast, even remotely. And we're still here. We're still trucking.
Mm-hmm.
I've experimented with various closets in my house for recording the podcast. Now we have pillows in front of our faces. So that's fun.
I had a child since then, and he's not even all that small anymore. He's like becoming an actual child.
All right, so today is Thursday. We're recording this on Thursday. The San Diego Unified School District and its teachers union, the San Diego Education Association, are going back to the bargaining table today, Thursday. They're going to try to hash out what the last few weeks of school will look like, and they're going to look weird. It seems almost obvious that is the top priority. Make it as weird as possible. I'm kidding. But there is an outline coming together of what will probably happen. They want to try to keep classes together. These classes that students have been learning in online distance-wise are going to have to translate to where some of the kids can come in and see people in person. How that actually works and how often they can do that is what is at stake. Now, the union put forward an offer saying, how about we do for elementary kids, we'll break them up into two groups of kids who want to come back, and then they'll go one day. One group will go one day, one group will go the other day, and they'll do that twice, and then on the fifth day, nobody will go. So basically, you would go from not having in-person school to having 4 hours a week. You'd still do the morning Zoom school, and then 2 hours twice a week. That's reopening. That's their reopen vision. I got to say, if you were going to engineer something, and I'm not saying they did, but if you were going to engineer something to like make it as little attractive as possible to parents who want to see their kids get back to school, you would probably do some version of this.
Yeah, I don't really see how it could be more inconvenient than what is happening now. Because what is happening currently is obviously been very hard on kids and families for many reasons. But if it has any saving grace, it's that you're at home all day in one place and you can do it. But like, if you have to add in the logistics of going to school for an hour and then coming back, that seems like more trouble than it's worth.
It just seems to answer a much, much narrower question than the one we've been asking. Like the upshot of this plan, like what it accomplishes that I can see is like it addresses some of the isolation problems that kids have been going through. It will allow them to see some kids. It will create some socialization opportunities. There are maybe some modest gains that could be made just from being near teachers and having an opportunity for face-to-face interaction that maybe doesn't work through Zoom. But as far as like addressing the fundamental problem about Zoom learning and the overall breakdown of like communities being a place that are fostered through school sites, giving kids a place to go all day. It doesn't do any of those, and I don't even really think it attempts to. And what I would imagine the defense would be is like, well, yeah, unfortunately, it's not safe to do those things. But this is all predicated on vaccines being offered to teachers. This is all after the fact of vaccines. And yet we're still just answering this very narrow question as opposed to the very broad question about opening schools.
Well, the entire premise of so much public education discourse from defenders of traditional schools for the last few decades has been that school communities with extensive services, food, sometimes food in the morning and in the middle of the day, services, connections to health, nurses, counselors, all of those combined with a involved class of parents and a culture with the principal and the teachers working together, hold each other accountable and to high standards. That's the entire vision of public education right now, as far as like it's outlined. And those school communities have been completely closed and shut down, eviscerated, really. Like, and so what do we? Those aren't going to be open. Now the question is, will they open in the fall? And what this substitutes is highly restricted face-to-face contact between an educator and a student. That's what this is like a plan to do a little of that. Now, this question was at the top of the mind of people who were watching the San Diego Unified School Board meeting on Tuesday night, where they were discussing some of these things, how far the progress of the vaccine for teachers has gone, all those things. And then it got to Dr. Howard Terrace, who is a pediatrician from UC San Diego Health, and he was presenting the experts' view from their UC San Diego scientists and researchers and doctors who provided the district some guidance on how to do this and have really been emphasizing things like ventilation. You've heard me talk about that. So Dr. Terrace says why school is going to be hybrid, and here was his answer.
Why, when we open in April, are we suggesting that it open in hybrid? A lot of that is because children are not going to be vaccinated, and the B117, this UK variant, is still going to be around.
That, along with the slide that he was showing at the time, which said that we're hybrid because students haven't gotten vaccinated, really provoked a lot of parents across the district into a severe worry, because what he seemed to be implying was that you could not reopen these school communities, you could not go back full time until students got vaccinated. Not just teachers at this point, but schools or students. But if that's the case, there's a pretty high likelihood that we won't have a youth vaccine available until maybe January, something like that. Well into this year, if not into 2022. And so that would mean, like, if you can't open schools full-time until that happens, we're not open schools full-time in the fall. Now, I emailed him because he said this right after saying the thing about vaccinations.
It could be that even before students are all vaccinated, there will be other public health indicators that making students more proximate will be safe. So we will look for that.
So he said to me when I emailed him, he said, look, I did not at all mean that we would have to have full vaccination in order to be able to have schools all the way open. I was saying that some things could happen that might change that. So I asked him, well, what was that? And he says, look, I'm not a public health expert. I'm not an epidemiologist. This is a Fauci-level issue. Tony Fauci, the face of the pandemic as far as the public health response to it. And he says, but from my pediatrician perspective, we'd have to see something like 80% of the adults vaccinated, most students in high school vaccinated, not a high frequency of the spread, and then morbidity, falling to the level of an average flu season. So he's saying, look, I don't know. But I think like that gets to the heart of this entire mystery and anxiety over the last few months, that like they keep throwing out these things that are highly panic-inducing for families, right? Without like a very clear idea of like what it is they need to see in order to get these school communities fully open.
The goalposts just keep changing. And I mean, as far as if you go back to how long the schools are going to be open, whether it's going to be an hour a day or 2 hours a week or whatever, I think like if you go back, we romanticize the idea of full day school now that it's been taken away for a year. But if you remember, like sometimes school got out at noon, or sometimes there was just a day during the week where you had to deal with your kid for some reason. So
every week in San Diego Unified, Thursday for us, schools are only half day.
Yeah, so there were a lot of logistics challenges to begin with, and those were hard for families. And so I think now that you throw in the idea of like making school much more sporadic and much more limited and much more like random hours in the middle of the day, like that's a lot to grapple with, on top of like the idea of vaccines for kids being a hurdle that we now also have to contend with.
Yeah, I actually think it's less that the goalposts keep moving, but that there's a unwillingness to even erect goalposts.
Yes.
Like I think it might be easier to deal with if there was a frank conversation going on, that you might not agree with the terms of debate, or there was a negotiation happening that you could maybe large groups of people would disagree with the parameters being set, the thresholds that need to be met for school to be open, but at least they'd be there. This is much more amorphous than that. It's not at all clear to me. It's clear that there's a negotiation going on, but I don't actually know what is being negotiated. I don't know what the give and take is. And it sort of seems like, if I'm honest, that full school, after school programs, 5 days a week, kids in classrooms with students their age and a teacher, school. It sort of seems like that's not even on the table, if I'm honest.
No, it's not. And
it's
I
so
think
unwilling to grapple with it that it feels like that's being pushed off as an unreasonable goal to be met at some point well into the future.
And that's, I think, that what causes a lot of the panic, because you can picture summer coming and then nothing ever happens with school policy over the summer, and then August coming and them like scrambling to figure out this next, we're still waiting to see how this comes together. Now, what really surprises me is the teachers union. It seems, somebody pointed out to me like this proposal with the sparse in-person contact, that's just a negotiating. They're obviously going farther than what they expect to actually get. But it's weird to me that that's what they actually want, that the end goal is actually none in person, and thus they're like going as far possible to that and then coming back as close as they're willing to. And instead of like more money or more benefits or hazard pay or something like that in fact what they're going for is no in-person school and willing to compromise down to like some bare minimum. That is what is really kind of jarring in this whole thing, that is actually where they want to be.
Yes.
All right, so I do have a prediction on where we do end up on this near term. The LA Unified School District has been basically in concert with San Diego Unified this entire year, everything from when they closed schools to how they advocated for funding. And LA Unified made a deal with its teachers union where elementary kids would go back every afternoon, so much more expensive than what the proposal was here. But high school and middle school kids would go back. They'd have to stay in the same cohort and ostensibly be basically learning online at a school. So they would stay in one room, not move around to other classrooms and have to take their other classes through the computer. So some real bizarre and difficult adaptations coming together, but we'll let you know when we hear what happens. You remember a long time ago now, it seems years, there was a proliferation of tent cities across San Diego. We did a story about the tent cities, the homeless tent cities, and how widespread they had gotten. and nothing really happened. And then, of course, hepatitis A, an outbreak of that virus occurred, killing a couple dozen San Diego homeless residents, and really striking a lot of fear in the city, and exposing this neglect of this problem for years. It kicked Mayor Kevin Faulconer into a frenzy of enforcement and sweeps, abatements as they're called, of these tent cities. Now, when he was running for mayor, Andy, Todd Gloria pledged to really rein that in. Like, that was an inhumane effort. He understood the origin of it, but he was going to address this.
Yeah, and I think what Gloria was tapping into was pretty consistent with a view that was reflected by number of people on the city council, a number of homeless activists, and, for lack of a better term, the progressive flank in town that viewed it as an inhumane approach, one that treated homelessness as essentially a law enforcement or quality of life issue, as opposed to some sort of economic and public health crisis.
But there was a pretty perceptible decline in the tent cities and the proliferation of them, at least in some areas. Now, they didn't disappear. I think any claim that they did disappear is false. Now, Lisa Halverstadt decided to check in on this. Now, it comes on the heels of a shocking video of a neighborhood patrol policeman shooting a homeless man who was eating a bowl of something, and they had an exchange about a knife that the person supposedly had. And it really brought to the fore this question of what are we doing with the police and the homeless folks who are living on the street. Now, she pulled the numbers, and Gloria, in fact, in the 3 months since he's been mayor, has basically kept that enforcement regimen in place. They are doing the same things they did under Mayor Kevin Faulconer. But the thing she also found is that homeless camps are proliferating. They are growing. There are more of them. So, Sarah, when you read that, what was the first thing that stood out for you?
Well, there were a couple of things. I think to the extent that there are maybe differences in Gloria's approach versus Faulconer, she made it clear that the numbers show not the outcomes the same, but he seems more willing to take on like individual problems or criticisms. And so, he responded to a number of, somebody posts photos of police cleaning up a camp and it's raining and maybe this shouldn't happen when there's inclement weather happening. And he'd respond to that individually and say, yes, you're right, I'm going to put a stop to that. And so he seems more willing to respond to individual complaints or critiques about how it's being carried out, even if there's not like a big wholesale change happening. And then the other thing that I noticed is, she mentioned that Gloria has enlisted this homelessness expert who's spent time at the federal level dealing with homelessness policy to conduct a review of how San Diego police should interact with the homelessness population. And it really wasn't long ago that the city just came out with this big, glossy, new, expensive, long plan for homelessness. And granted, that plan kind of didn't go very far in saying how it should address the police and homelessness. It sort of just said that it should address it somehow. So presumably this would get a little more specific, but it just seems like we're locked in this endless cycle of consultants and plans and task forces, and we're just doing a lot more of that. Yeah,
I want to get to more of that point, but I think our our listeners would be into the actual numbers, the rate of abatements and the amount of encampments in town. How did Lisa quantify how that had changed under Gloria? What were the numbers that she pulled up?
Yeah, so it looks like last year, while Kevin Faulconer was mayor, from July through November, there were about 250 cleanups per month. And then in the first portion of this year, there were about 215. And so not a marked difference. Maybe it's happening slightly less, but that could also be as a result of weather or other kind of intangible factors.
Okay, and then did she quantify the number of encampments that we were able to say that has been increasing?
Yeah, so the Downtown San Diego Partnership has always kind of kept these stats as far as encampments in the downtown area, and they were counting about 84 in the downtown area in November, and now that's up to about 105. And so it does seem like they are growing to some extent.
And I think what was really interesting about her point was that it seemed like what she was saying in that reporting was that the camps were expanding because jails weren't taking people. I don't know if that was the direct connection, but in fact, in the past, they would, if you got something worthy of going to jail, they would send you to one. And now, because of COVID and other crowding issues, they're not sending people to jail. So really interesting revelation in that part of the story as well.
Yeah, it doesn't paint a fantastic picture of the way we deal with homeless, like the way we keep people off the street.
I'll tell you, that video of the homeless man getting shot, and he survived, but that video itself was a just horrific portrayal of San Diego in so many different ways. It was trash strewn. It was a guy obviously struggling. It was police violence. It was so many things. And it was just it's just, how do you not look at this and realize like, hey, this is just not something I am at all okay with in this community. Now, one thing we did also hear this week, Gloria and the county have deployed dozens more people to outreach roles in a sort of social worker capacity to try to get people off the street and provide services. So there are alternatives being deployed, but the problem is not going to get easier. And he just has a big choice to make, right? He's going to have to decide, do you keep up this kind of intense enforcement, these abatements, or do you try to do some wholly different approach? Are the police a main tool in this or not? And that's just a decision he's going to make, and it's going to be hard for him to punt it any longer towards like plans or consultants or other things that might be able to help provide some easier way out of it.
Yeah, the task force hamster ball that Sarah was describing seems like it's designed to avoid having to make a tough decision. That there's going to be one more consultant's report on the horizon that's going to include enough information that'll make a decision academic as opposed to one of judgment, given a lack of perfect options. And it's odd because he ran on a pretty clear platform as mayor that the way that they were doing things was wrong and he was going to do it differently. And at least thus far, doesn't seem to be clear conviction to just go ahead and change things.
I mean, the flip side of this is sort of that we mentioned that Hep A was the jolt that Kevin Faulkner experienced to get him to do something. And the something was intense police enforcement. But as we've seen, that doesn't mean that homelessness goes away. It means that they go to jail. And so, whatever the something ends up being is a big deal. And, Todd Gloria made the point that he can't just snap his fingers and make a big change. He needs a little bit of time. And, that's a point taken. But whatever the big thing is, it has to be well thought out.
And also going on this week, we'll see whether this has any impact. People seem confident that it won't, but we've been wrong before. In the next few weeks, the convention center is going to be shutting down. They're phasing that down as a homeless shelter. In fact, the county's going to turn it into another super vaccination site. And they're setting up alternative shelters as a place to transition some of these people. But at the beginning of COVID, there was a noticeable decline in encampments because so many people were afraid of the virus and ended up in the convention center. And that's been that way for a year. And so, I don't think we know for sure that everybody will transition to these new replacement shelters or the other existing options. Maybe some of those people are going to end up back in encampments downtown.
Well, everybody in the country is going to get a check or a direct deposit in the next little while. And that is going to mean and be part of a massive infusion of capital into our region. We'll talk about that after the break.
Drowning is a leading cause of accidental death among all ages, but the leading cause of death for children 1 to 4 years old. So it is essential that all of our children are safe in the water this summer. To further that cause, our sponsor, the Retired Employees Association, City of San Diego, will team up with the Prevent Drowning Foundation to underwrite the cost of a Learn to Swim program for 60 local kids this summer. REA wishes you and your family a safe and happy summer.
All right, so Thursday, the Union Tribune had a front page sort of graphic display of everything that were, a lot of things that were in the $1.9 trillion relief package, the rescue plan approved by Congress. And now it's going to result, like I said, in direct deposits, $1,400, $300 per month per child for families that earn less than $150,000 a year. That is the biggest expansion of the social safety net in this country that any of us have ever seen. And the UT had all these graphics of all the things that this stimulus package does, and it didn't even make the front of it. That didn't even make that package of illustrations of how big this spending deal is. An extraordinary bill that really has been passed and now will send so much money. The city of San Diego estimates $300 million is going to come in for it, enough to cover the $80 million or so budget deficit for the current year, and then the $160 to $170 million budget deficit that is anticipated for next year, and some more. It's an extraordinary change from the deficits and the frank talk about deficits that we were preparing for with the new mayor. That's just the city. Andy, is he gonna drop the sort of structural deficits that reform efforts he was going to pursue?
There was a funny little piece of language in one of the press releases that alerted to the fact that this would be enough money that if you wanted to continue city services at their current level, you now could, which was framed in a sort of conditional that I wouldn't have expected. And I was like, what? Wait, do you not want to?
Yeah, but underneath it is this assumption that you would not want
or
to.
Or you might not want to, yeah.
Right, what they've been doing. And so that might be a callback to his, we have been spending more than we're taking in. Now, this is one-time money, so that would still be the case.
Yeah.
You would still want to make structural budget deficit changes, right?
Yeah. Well, it is one-time money, but presumably you think that in the fiscal year that follows, we might be on the other side of the pandemic, and your revenue,
hotels are booming and everything.
Really booming and everything.
Because the biggest issue is hotel room taxes have
sales taxes never collapsed to the extent that we thought they would, and
property taxes did fine.
So it really was TOT that ended up being a blow to the city's budget. This is going to plug that. Last year we did the dance about how many strings were on this money that was coming from the federal government, and the city figured that out. And I don't think that there's going to be much desire to pretend that that's going to be hard to figure out this time around again. I think most of the budget memos are just going to say, look, we're paying for all the stuff. We'll figure out a way to connect it to the pandemic.
It's just truly incredible that 1 year into this, both the state and the city are actually going to have plenty of money. And that just seems inconceivable to think about. 6 months ago or a year ago.
Yeah, the state was already dealing with a surplus, was sending its own $600 checks out to poorer people across the state, and now is going to get another $26 billion from this deal. And the school district, let's switch to that. They fund the school district. The San Diego Unified is expecting $300 million more, if not more, to come from some of these reopening incentives and such. It is remarkable how much capital is coming into the region. Now, they're supposed to use that for reopening, for learning loss, all kinds of things. We're going to, I guess, have to be prepared for big summer school plans, more equipment. I don't know, because they have to spend it in like 2 years, which I'm sure they're hating that they have to spend so much money so fast. But really interesting. The county, all the cities are going to be dealing with a lot more money. It's going to be a real test of both their ability to spend it well and effectively and have impact, and our ability to follow it and make sense of it and track down any corruption with it. Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast, the most popular public affairs podcast, recorded next to my Indo board in San Diego, city of San Diego. If you value this podcast and the explanatory journalism we do at Voice, we really want to offer you a cool opportunity. The Parker Foundation is offering to match donations we get right now to support our work, the stories and projects we do that explain how San Diego operates. Now, if you haven't given in a while, or if you've never given, this really helps. Even a few bucks helps us meet our goals so that we can double that support and get that grant in. So if you've never given, this is a great chance to try it. You'll double your impact and support our mission. Join now at VOSD.org/ParkerMatch. That's VOSD.org/ParkerMatch. Again, that's VOSD.org/ParkerMatch. The whole point of, we have two main missions at Voice San Diego. One is to do investigative work. The other is to make sure people understand how things work here. This is to support that latter effort. I thank Parker Foundation so much for making that possible for us to invest some resources into getting those things out and helping people understand their community. It means a lot to us if you support it. Thank you. That's VOSD.org/ParkerMatch. I'm Scott Lewis, CEO and Editor-in-Chief at Voice of San Diego. Andrew Keats is Assistant Editor. Sarah Libby is Managing Editor. And this show is produced by Nate John. Thanks for listening this year, 1 year since Tom Hanks Day. We'll talk to you next week.